Japan never expected to be found first, never expected to be met at altitude, never expected a wall of radar-guided gunfire waiting at the end. By sunrise on June 19, 1944, the script had flipped. Most Americans knew Pearl Harbor. Few knew this day would erase Japan's carrier-striking arm. Pre-dawn air tastes like salt and gasoline. The sea looks calm, almost kind. It lies. Steel decks sweat with dew. Yellow shirts windmill their arms. Chocks are pulled. A blue fighter noses toward the catapult. 6 half-inch Brownings sit quiet in its wings. 400 rounds in each gun, up front. A Pratt & Whitney R-2800 breathes deep. 2,000 horsepower shivers the hull. The pilot checks trim. He checks mixture. He checks courage. This is Task Force 58 at flight quarters. 15 carriers spread across miles of Pacific. Battleships idle inside the screen. Cruisers guard the flanks. Destroyers saw the water white. Below decks, combat information centers wake up. Radar scopes bloom with phosphor. Bearings and altitudes click into voice tubes. Fighter directors start building a geometry of survival. The airplane crouched on the bow is a Grumman F-6F Hellcat. It was not drawn for grace. It was drawn to come home, shot up and land again. Top speed, about 390 miles an hour, or 628 kilometers per hour. Ceiling roughly 37,000 feet, 11 kilometers plus. Climb rate measured in thousands of feet per minute. Armor around the pilot. Self-sealing fuel tanks under his ribs. Wings that punish mistakes less than they should. It is a tool for a difficult job. It is designed for a rookie to fly well and an ace to fly better. The calm sea hides a second truth. Somewhere west, enemy carriers are turning into wind. Crews there believe 1941 can happen again. A6M Zeros still turn tight. Dive and torpedo squadrons still brief neat patterns. Radios still click. Confidence crosses decks like weather. They expect to choose the place of contact. They expect to see their targets before their targets see them. But this is not 1942. The lesson was paid for in those early years. Over Oahu, over Wake, over the Coral Sea. The Zero wrote its legend. It climbed faster than most U.S. types. It turned inside them. It punished hesitation. Many American pilots climbed into stubby Wildcats and learned the hard limits of courage. They survived by energy tactics, by dives, by teamwork, and sometimes by luck. Losses hurt worse than statistics could show. The conclusion hardened in ready rooms and factories alike. Courage alone was not a plan. A different machine and a different system were required. By mid-1942, Grumman's drawing boards looked like triage notes. Pilots reported what kept them alive and what got friends killed. Outturning the Zero was scratched off the wall. Priority moved to protection, firepower, and climb. The new fighter would be heavier and stronger. It would carry 6 50 caliber guns, not just 2 or 4. It would hold together in steep dives. It would forgive hard landings on a short, moving field. The airframe grew broad-shouldered. The engine was chosen for torque and reliability. Armor and sealing added weight. And also, survivors. That is why this deck smells like hot brakes and cordite. Not fear. The Hellcat is only one part of the change. The others are harder to film. Radar that sees farther than eyes. Fighter direction that turns blips into ambushes. Magazines stacked deep with 5-inch shells, many with proximity fuses. Tankers and tenders that keep the flight schedule sacred. Training that makes procedures automatic when pulse rates spike. A red wand drops. The bow heaves. The catapult smashes a straight line into the wind. The fighter is airborne in 2 heartbeats. Another follows, then another. A black ladder of specks climbs into the gray. The fleet shrinks to a string of wakes and exhaust. In the headsets. Voices stay level. Vector. Angels. Heading. Push. Out west, the scope paints new echoes, dozens, then scores. Japan never expected to meet a system. Today. That system is wide awake. By late 1943, the Grumman F-6F was rolling onto carrier decks, and pilots felt the difference. The F-4F Wildcat had been a stopgap. The Hellcat felt purpose-built. It climbed with authority, dove cleanly, and thanks to armor and self-sealing tanks, came back when a 6 50-inch 12.7 millimeter Brownings and a Pratt & Whitney R2800 gave it teeth and stamina. Top speed roughly 388 391 mph, ceiling about $37,000 FT. It was honest to fly. A nervous ensign could launch, land, and fight without being an ace. But airplanes do not win wars alone. Behind each F-6F stood the System US, factories turning out aircraft by the thousands per month, spare engines by the crate, ammunition by the carload. Japan, strained for fuel and aluminum, struggled to replace even monthly losses. Training diverged, too. American naval aviators typically logged 300 hours before combat, while Japanese syllabi were shortened under pressure. The math was merciless. By early 1944, radar control and disciplined caps put Hellcats where they needed to be. The A6M was no longer the pursuer. It was the one being hunted. The stage for the showdown was the Marianas' small green dots in a blue immensity, yet priceless ground. Hold Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, and you hold airfields that point straight at the Japanese home islands. From those runways, very heavy bombers could leap the last stretch of ocean. From the surrounding seas, fast carriers could shield the invasion beaches and hunt the enemy's fleet. That logic brought the U.S. Fifth Fleet forward in June 1944. At the center stood Admiral Raymond A. Spruance, cool and economical, commanding the fleet, and Vice Admiral Mark A. Pete Mitcher, the Air Admiral, commanding Task Force 58. Their striking arm was mass, discipline, and reached 15 carriers, 7 fleet, and 8 light, screened by fast battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. On the flight decks waited roughly 900 carrier aircraft, most of them F-6F Hellcats, with Avengers and Helldivers to carry the heavier blows. Screens spread across miles of ocean. Picket destroyers watched the horizon. CICs on every large ship warmed up their radar plots. The geometry of defense altitude stacks, intercept points, AA sectors was sketched before the first engine turned across the Philippine Sea. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa assembled the first mobile fleet for a counterstroke. He had 9 carriers. He had courage and experience among some leaders. But too many cockpit seats were filled by newly minted aviators with sharply reduced training, some with fewer than 50 flight hours in type. Fuel was tight. Spares were thin. The A6M could still turn beautifully. The D4Y and B6N could still bite. Yet the system around them was strained. On one side, numbers, radar, and a deep pilot pipeline. On the other, fragile attrition and a legend from 1942 that no longer matched the sky of 1944. Night before battle. The calendar reads mid-June, aboard the light carrier USS Independence. A junior officer, call him La-At CMDR. David Harrington paces the starboard catwalk. Salt is in the air. Gasoline rides the breeze from the fueling hoses. The deck is a grid of white lines and shadow. His Hellcat. Tail number 29 sits with wings folded, oil still warm. He runs a glove along the rivets and feels something like certainty. This is not 1942. Dawn gathers. The ship turns into wind. Handlers push blue fighters into place. Ordnance crews feed belts into 50 caliber bays. In the ready room, Air Group 22 hears a final, even-toned brief from Captain Walter Green, veteran of earlier fights, voice like gravel. Message simple: we will be attacked. We will meet them high and far. Keep your energy. Work as a team. Beside Harrington sits Lam Samuel Ortiz, young and steady. All at once, he asks. Harrington shrugs. If they're smart. But in 1944, smart isn't enough. Mass is. And tonight, the decks of TF-58 hold more of it than the Pacific has ever seen. The first warning wasn't a shout on deck. It was a soft green bloom in a dark room. Inside the Combat Information Center, radar scopes glowed while plotters traced grease pencil tracks across a backlit board, one contact, then a handful, then too many to count. Bearings from the west. Altitudes stacking, range closing. Calm voices fed the flag bridge in short, precise bursts. On the bridge of USS Lexington, Vice Admiral Mark A. Pete Mitcher listened without changing expression. His orders were clipped and ordinary, which made them steadier. Launch the cap, stack them at Angels 20 and above. Angels, altitude in thousands of feet. Vector to intercept, hold the line, phones clicked, boatswain's pipes sang, flight quarters rippled across 15 decks, far across the Philippine Sea. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa had raised his own Storm 9 carriers, roughly 400 aircraft. The plan looked like 1941 tight formations, layered strikes. Surprise at the end. But many cockpit seats held graduates of shortened syllabi, some with fewer than 50 hours in type. The machines had trade-offs, agile A-6M fighters with little protection. Fast D-4Y Judy dive bombers built light, B-6N Jill torpedo planes needing long, level attack runs. They flew anyway duty, doctrine, habit expecting an empty ocean and familiar odds. Aboard the light carrier USS Independence, the deck crew rolled Hellcat number 29 to the bow, broad shoulders, thick wing roots, 6 50-inch 12.7 mm Brownings. Self-sealing tanks under the pilot, Leti CMDR. David Harrington stepped onto the wing, gloves skimming warm rivets. This machine had brought him home with holes before. It was built to take punishment and still trap on a short, moving runway. He strapped in, pulled the canopy forward, checked the board fuel, oil, ammo, trim, then brought the Pratt & Whitney R2800 up to a steady growl. Catapults smashed straight lines into the wind. Blue shapes leapt in 2s and 4s, wheels tucking as they clawed for height. Another squadron followed, then a third, until the sky above Task Force 58 was stippled with climbing dots. Below, plotters updated the picture every few breaths. Raid 1 bearing 270 Angels, 15 to 20. Raid 2 forming behind it. Higher, range 50 plus, closing. The radio cracked with Commander Frank Dalton, the squadron COing Hammer flight. Hammer lead, intelligence estimates 400 plus across 4 Waves fighters. Dive bombers, torpedo planes, remember your training. Keep altitude, boom and zoom. Don't turn with a 0, hit once. Climb, reset, no drama. Just the checklist. Skipper, Lil T. Samuel Ortiz keyed up from the right wing. Let's bring home clean gun cameras. Harrington answered the way he did on final approach. Stay on my wing. We'll send them back the way they came. At 15,000 FT-4600 mm, the air thinned. The fleet below flattened into geometry wake lines, smoke plumes, staggered screens, westward. The horizon darkened first glints, then specks, then aircraft A-6Ms weaving high, Judy dive bombers stepping down, Jill torpedo planes lower like beads on strings. Sun on red roundels is a bright misleading thing. Multiple bogies, bearing 270, estimate 80 plus, Angels unknown. Came the sector call. Captain Walter Green, the CAG. Cut in, all units. Intercept. Push now. Do not let them through. Harrington set prop and mixture, added a touch of right rudder, and felt the airplane become a tool in his hand. Altitude is life. Once you spend it, you don't get it back. They rolled left into the sun. The needle swept through 300 memoirs, 260 knots, 483 km/h, then 350 miles, 304 knots, 563 km/h. Harrington chose a high-cover pair of Zero shepherding bombers and let gravity pick the second, Hammer 2, on me. At 1,000 yards, 914 metern, he steadied, let the sight float onto the trailing fighter's tail, and pressed the trigger. 6 Brownings spoke at once. Tracers stitched a bright sentence through morning air. The Zero shuddered. Then came a part, smear. Then empty sky, splash. He said inventory, not triumph, and eased into the vertical to trade speed back for altitude. Ortiz called the next beat. 1 Judy smoking pilot out. Braking right. Around them the pattern was constant short dives, short bursts, climbs, never the long, tempting turn, below. Another Hellcat division fell on the torpedo planes, a B-6N Jill, fat with intent, tried to hold level for a launch and ran into converging streams of fire, then only bubbles and a wing on the water. "Skipper, I'm being bracketed," Ortiz warned. 2 Zeros at 5 o'clock low, closing. Harrington didn't look back. The geometry lived in his head. He rolled left, unloaded, let the nose fall until the airspeed came alive, half-rolled, and dropped in behind the trailer. A 3-count burst into the engine smoke, and the leader overshot. Ortiz used the window exactly as briefed power on. 5 degrees high. Climb back to the perch. Across miles of sky. The same story played. Japanese formations briefed as tidy diagrams bled cohesion under radar-directed intercepts. Veterans tried to hold discipline. Newcomers chased targets or drifted off-axis. American sections rotated with metronome certainty. Fresh pairs replaced those who had just fired and climbed. Climbers checked fuel and spacing. Below. The fleet's 5-inch per 38 batteries walked ranges timed mechanical fuses at first and, where issued, VT proximity fuses that turned the last 1,000 yards into a hard place to live. No gore, just physics and bad odds for aircraft that must fly straight to aim. Harrington leveled at $18,000 FT $5,500 and checked fuel and ammunition green. New contacts, green called second element behind the first, larger and higher, estimate 120, bearing 280, hammer. Stay on the first group until they break. Dalton's voice followed, firm and dry, energy, position, discipline, up sun. A 0 pulled vertical to tempt a duel. Harrington led it. The Hellcat climbed with 2,600 FT per mine 13.2 ms in hand. He stopped the pull a second early, rolled right, slid behind the arc, tapped a half-second only enough, and left before a third fighter could join. Someone else would finish that story. His job was to keep a box of sky empty. By mid-morning, records suggest the first wave was shredded. A few attackers leaked through. There are no perfect screens, but very few reached the inner ring. And those met black puffs and bright shells. The radio stayed calm. Val down, Jill down, 2 Zeros breaking south. Harrington glanced at the gauge friendly and at his wingman. A blue wedge, exactly where he should be. They slid into a new geometry. The second wave looked heavier, more fighters high, more bombers stepping down. The method didn't change attack from above in pairs. Brief bursts. Climb away, never trade the top of the ladder. Dalton kept the net even. Don't let them pick the fight. You pick it, hit, climb, count to 5. Decide again. A section from another squadron dived too long and lingered low. 2 Zeros latched onto their high 6 and tried to drag them into a flat circle. Harrington held 1 extra count, arrived behind the trailer at a shallow cross angle, and flicked a quarter second. The fighter smoked and sagged. The American pair got their moment to climb out. He didn't stay to watch. Rule of the day, protect the stack. Below 10,000 FT, 3,000 mm, the picture grew ragged flak bursts. Damaged bombers picking headings no briefing covered, single fighters diving across wake lines for speed. Harrington stayed high, where choices come earlier and last longer. Ortiz called a Judy at 1 o'clock, low. "Let it go," Harrington said. "Someone's waiting down there. We're the lock on the door." They turned instead toward two A6Ms that had drifted north. The fight ended quickly. Energy fights do, hammer flight, fuel checks. Dalton called as the second wave broke apart. Harrington ran the numbers burn, distance to the fleet, time to reset and reported green. Ammunition still 1,000 rounds across the guns. Oils and cylinders steady. Ortiz read the same. "You, ready for round 2. Skipper." It didn't need an answer. Always. Harrington said, "Below." The task force kept rhythm. Destroyers shifted stations in long white mustaches of wake. Fast battleships tracked arcs with directors, changing lead and elevation without fuss. On the carriers, crews refueled, rearmed, relaunched with practiced repetition. In CICs, plotters erased old lines and drew new ones in the same motion. It wasn't one thing, it was many radar, trained controllers, reliable radios, deep magazines, abundant fuel, and pilots with the hours to use them well. The west darkened again. More shadows, more specks, another storm. Wars repeat moments with higher stakes. Harrington thought of 1942, the feel of a lighter fighter and the hope that nerve could outvote physics. In 1944, the answer was clearer. Nerve mattered. So did torque, altitude, radar, and timing. He trimmed 2 clicks nose down, checked the drop tank valve, and cracked the canopy to keep the glass from fogging. Small things done right keep people alive. Cap, push now. Came the next vector, bearing 280 Angels 25. Expect heavy fighter cover? Dalton underlined it the usual way. Keep your pairs. Call your shots. Climb when you say you will. Harrington settled the nose and felt gravity pay out speed like a rope. Ortiz tucked tight on the right. Tracers flicked far to the south and died as quickly as they began. He held patience. Arriving high and fast makes every choice easier. The formations ahead were close enough now that wings showed bomb racks, canopy frames, even paint lines. Harrington picked the place the arcs would cross and said what he always said at this point. To Ortiz and to himself. Short burst, no hero turns. Back on top in 5. The first intercept had begun with a whisper in a dark room. The next began the same way, calm voice in the headset. The same physics under the wings. The enemy still came fast, brave, determined, but the lattice picket to flagship, radar lobe to gun mount to fighter sight, was in rhythm now. Harrington eased into the dive and felt the airplane go light. Ahead. The west was full of airplanes. Behind. The sky was full of men and ships who expected them to do exactly what they had trained to do. The second wave looked endless at first glance. Controllers called 120 aircraft fighters high. D4Y Judy step-downs. B6N Jill torpedo planes low. A black tide from the west. Harrington tightened his grip. Here they come. On the wing. Ortiz exhaled. Skipper. That's a whole Air Force. Harrington's answer was flat. Then we thin it. The Hellcats went downhill as a pack 36 blue fighters, stacked in pairs, sun at their backs, speed building through 300 to 350 mph, short bursts only. No long chases. The first cuts landed like blades. Formations buckled. Veteran Japanese leaders tried to knit the lines. Green wingmen drifted. Then broke. A D-3A Val dropped into a push with its bomb still slung. Harrington crossed the top, met it in the shallows, and lanced the wing route with 50 caliber fire. The bomb cooked off high. A brief flash. Then empty sky. Tally 1 Val. He said inventory, not celebration. Ortiz answered through static. One Judy smoking crew out. Pressure came from above. A6Ms tried to clamp the fight into flat circles. One latched onto Harrington's 6 and stitched his starboard flap. The Hellcat shrugged armor, doing its quiet work, then rolled hard left and down. At 5,000 Dows VT-500 memoirs, he traded speed for the vertical, climbing through the zero stall and reversing to a hammering. 2-second burst, a bright cough, then quiet. Splash, he said to the windscreen. Already easing back to altitude, the rule held use energy, not ego. Across miles of sky, the same script played: boom and zoom, climb, reset. AA fire took the leakers. 5-inch per 38 mounts walked patterns under the merges. Proximity fuses did the rest at lethal ranges. Captain Walter Green's division found the torpedo corridor and slammed it shut. Jill's needed level runs near 200 Namimira. That lane no longer existed. Green cut 2 apart in a single pass. Other sections finished the job. White wakes below turned into broken arcs and drifting fuel. The Japanese kept coming. The third wave built, just as the second fell apart. Controllers read 80 aircraft. Harrington checked fuel and ammo still good. They're throwing everything, Ortiz said, voice quieter now. This is the last of their punch. Fresh cap sections rose as spent pairs cycled down. The choreography felt mechanical in the best way. Launch, intercept, egress, refuel, rearm, launch again. The system hummed. The quality of the attackers slipped. More pilots flew loose. Some struggled to hold altitude blocks. A few pressed close with firm hands on the stick and perfect timing. Most did not. Harrington rolled into another downhill cut against a Judy that had wandered off its step down. He gave a clean, half-second burst through the engine. The canopy flashed open, silk blossomed behind and fell toward a wide ocean. He leveled without watching it end. Ortiz called a 0 at 2 o'clock. Short angle. Harrington warned. Ortiz answered with 3 neat words. 1 burst. Done. Radios filled with toneless reports. Val down, Jill down. Fighter off my high 6. Clear climb now. Smoke trails crossed like a hurried graph drawn over blue. You could taste unburned fuel in the mask. The fleet below kept its geometry destroyers weaving. Battleships shifting aim points. Carriers turning into wind and back out again. Up here, the air felt busy and strangely orderly. Procedures were doing the thinking no one had time to do. By early afternoon, controllers marked a 4th wave smaller, maybe 50 aircraft, but mixed and uneven, training types in the stack. Older twins trimmed to carry a bomb load. The voice of Commander Dalton cut through with the same dry calm he used for checklists. Gentlemen, finish it. Same rules. Hellcats met them far out. Efficiency replaced adrenaline. 2 ship elements took short, surgical shots, then climbed back to the perch. Below 10,000 FT, AA fire walked measured ladders. Twin-engine bombers tried to lumber through and came apart under intersecting streams. A few attackers got close enough to see wakes and wakes alone. Most did not. The wave collapsed without a clear line where it had been whole. Then came a kind of quiet. Harrington leveled at $12,000 FT3 650 memoirs and looked for shapes where there were none. Smoke hung in straight lines that bent only with the wind. Oil sheened the surface in long. Dark scrolls, life rafts dotted the gaps between drifting metal. How many, do you think? Skipper Ortiz asked. Voice steady again. Harrington exhaled. Enough to change the day. The frequency calmed. Controllers reset cap stacks with routine economy. Squadrons checked fuel and ammo. Deck crews, below, rolled fresh fighters to the bow. Out west. The horizon lightened. The pressure receded the way a storm does, first at the edges, then all at once. You only know it's over when you stop checking the mirrors every 5 seconds. The meaning arrived slower. Records suggest hundreds of Japanese aircraft were lost in the day's fighting, across air-to-air and AA fire, with very few reaching a viable attack run. American losses were small by comparison, under a few dozen for the day, many of them operational, not combat kills. Exact counts vary by category and source. The shape of the result does not. The offensive arm that had once dictated pace and place was spent. Harrington rolled a degree or two left and right. Scanning. He could still feel the bite marks of tracers in his wing. The Hellcat handled as if nothing had happened. That was design doing its quiet job, armor where it mattered. Fuel where it could take a hit. A big radial that kept time like a metronome. He looked over at Ortiz, tight, where he should be. A blue wedge against the sun. This is the breaking point. Harrington thought without saying it. Not a single duel. Not a single ace. A system radar, fighter direction, disciplined rotations, deep magazines, steady hands, and machines that traded elegance for endurance. The Zero had not lost its courage. It had lost the sky it needed. The Hellcat had not won alone. It had arrived with an entire fleet inside its headset. Smoke folded into the haze. The sea turned ordinary again, if you ignored the drift of wreckage. Up high. The cap reset their stacks and waited for new calls that never came. The second wave had been a storm. The third, a strain. The fourth, a surrender to physics and preparation. What was left now was maintenance, debrief, and a long, quiet taxi toward a wire that would catch and hold. The offensive had run out of sky. The day had not. By late afternoon, the sky settled into a pale, empty blue. No more black swarms, no burning arcs, just smoke on the horizon and the hush that follows long noise. Lati, Kim Dr. David Harrington eased his Hellcat toward the pattern, eyes flicking from altimeter to fuel. The gauge sat low. The ammo counters were near zeros. His hands trembled on the stick, not from fear now, but from release. Independence. Harrington, RTB, copy, Harrington, Charlie Deck. The ship turned into wind. The meatball winked steady, amber. Harrington dropped the hook, checked flaps, trimmed nose up, and crossed the round down at carrier approach speed steady, precise, practiced. Tires kissed steel. The wire caught and yanked him to a square stop. He safetied the trigger, popped the canopy, and let engine heat wash past as the R-2800 ticked down. For a long breath, he didn't move. Then the crew ran him forward, hook clear, wings folding like a closing book. The flight deck crackled with a strange electricity triumph braided with exhaustion. Pilots climbed down in a dozen postures, grins, 1,000-yard stares, quiet handshakes. The smell of hot oil and powder lingered on flight suits. Plane captains swarmed each bay, patching holes with speed tape and sheet metal, dipping tanks, checking hydraulics, reloading .50 caliber belts. The battle was not only won, it was survived. Ortiz found him by the island, helmet under his arm, hair damp with sweat and spray. "Skipper," he said, still catching breath. "I lost count up there." Harrington looked past him to the rim of the world. Oil slicks made dark ribbons on the sea where aircraft had vanished. "So did I," he said softly. "But we both know what it means." Night slid in with a warm wind and the low thrum of machinery in the wardroom and ready rooms. The mood hovered between relief and disbelief, not grim, not giddy. Voices overlapped like a busy bar at shore. Hands chased shapes in the air, retelling merges and dives. Gun camera crews threaded strips through viewers. Someone laughed too loud. Someone else said nothing at all. Under the noise, there was a shared. Sober knowledge the day could have gone differently if the cap rotations had slipped, if radar plots had lied, if luck had chosen other names. Later. Captain Walter Green spoke to the air group with his usual gravel calm. No speeches, only facts. Gentlemen. The attacking arm we faced this morning is gone for now. Day of tallies lists 395 Japanese aircraft destroyed, from all causes, and 29 U.S. losses. Sources disagree by category air-to-air, AA, operational. Across June 19th to 20, most historians argue 550 to 645 Japanese aircraft lost and 123 U.S. aircraft, many operational. Harrington stepped onto the catwalk afterward and leaned against the rail. The Pacific was a black sheet under a slice of moon, far off. Faint fires still marked where air crews had ditched or gone in. Somewhere in that dark were life rafts, and in those rafts men who had flown hard because they were told to, and because they believed they must. The victory felt sharp, but not clean. The conclusion pressed in all the same. Japan had lost more than machines. It had lost experience that could not be replaced at pace flight leaders, section tacticians, men who knew how to hold a formation under fire. Replacements would come, but many would bring compressed training and too few hours on type. The Americans, by contrast, were now a throughput factories pushing airframes and engines by the trainload, depots feeding parts, tankers feeding decks, schools graduating pilots with the hours to use good airplanes well. The machine of war was not just hardware. It was a schedule that held. Someone nearby cracked a joke about the mess line. Someone else, quieter, logged a gun count and fuel burn, setting tomorrow in motion. Up above, the last cap section trapped in, a pair of tired Hellcats snagging the wire one after the other with neat, boring precision. Boring was the point. Harrington watched the deck crews roll a patched fighter toward the forward elevator. The numbers Green had read kept looping his thoughts, not as a boast, but as a threshold crossed. The Zero hadn't lost its courage today. It had lost the conditions it needed to win surprise. Unopposed approach, opponents willing to turn flat under it. The Hellcat had not made the difference alone. Radar had, fighter direction had, AA had, training and fuel had, a fleet had, from this night on. He knew. The carriers behind him would steam where they chose and fight on times of their choosing. The sky had tilted, and the men who felt that tilt most clearly were the ones who had just come back to the deck with empty belts, low tanks, and hands that finally stopped shaking. Morning came quiet. No swarms of Zeros, no black pillars clawing the sky, only the steady hum of carriers pushing west, and a horizon smudged by yesterday, for history. Nothing looked the same. Most summaries put June 19th losses in the 300 to 400 range, primarily from air combat and AA, though sources differ on categories and counting methods. Veteran crews went down with them, skill and experience. Once the edge of the first mobile fleet, were suddenly scarce. The force that had shocked the Pacific in 1941 was now a shadow of itself. Sailors aboard Task Force 58 understood the meaning at once. From that day, American carriers could choose when to attack and where to fight. The initiative shifted and stayed. Fighter direction, radar, and proximity-fused guns had not only won a day, they had altered the geometry of the whole campaign. The F-6F Hellcat became shorthand for that change. It was fast, heavy-hitting, and forgiving. A rookie could launch and land without drama. A veteran could make it dance in the vertical. Claims credited to the type by war's end exceeded 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. Tallies vary by method, but the scale is undisputed. The oft-cited 19:1 kill ratio appears in summaries. Historians caution that figures reflect mixed causes and differing record-keeping. The takeaway endures in the Pacific. The Hellcat gave the fleet a reliable, repeatable air advantage. But the airplane was only the front edge of a system. The deeper legacy was proof. Proof that training hours mattered more than slogans. That radar and disciplined control could replace luck. That thick logistics fuel, spares, and fresh pilots could turn an air wing into a metronome. America found that rhythm by mid-1944. Japan could not. Its pilot pipeline had narrowed, its fuel stocks thinned, its industry could not replace losses at the tempo the ocean now demanded. Harrington kept a private memory of the afternoon light on the water. Not the noise, not the tracers. The stillness after. Hellcats folded their wings along the deck like a row of blue shoulders. Men laughed because they were alive, and yet a weight lingered. Those who had fought them were not cowards. Many were boys, certain they could bend the day. They flew into a problem that courage could not fix. Historians often point to June 19th as the hinge, the day Japanese carrier aviation ceased to exist as a decisive strike arm, the day the Hellcat moved from service airplane to legend, the day the Pacific sky became, in practice, an American workspace patrolled, plotted, and defended by procedure, from then to war's end. Carriers struck on their schedule, Saipan, Guam, Tinian, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, each step covered by cap stacks and AA curtains that felt almost routine. The strategic effects reached far beyond the fleet. Airfields in the Marianas soon hosted very heavy bombers pointing at the home islands. Sea control made the runways possible. The runways made the next phase inevitable. 3 months later, Tokyo heard engines far inland, systems stacked on systems until geography bent to math. When surrender came in 1945, Hellcats circled above Tokyo Bay as the ceremony unfolded on USS Missouri. The zero did not vanish from memory. It became history, brave, innovative, and outpaced by a machine built around training, sensors, and supply. The Hellcat remained on the deck, a symbol not of perfection, but of margin armor where it mattered, fuel where it endured, and a fleet behind it that never ran empty at the wrong time. That is the warning inside the victory. Air war had moved beyond the few. Aces still mattered, but systems decided nations that could outtrain, outbuild, and out-coordinate would shape the sky. The Great Marianas turkey shoot proved it in a single long day, and the night that followed. Harrington would remember the color of that sunset, the sea, red gold, the smoke thinning, the deck crews already turning tomorrow's sorties. He thought of names on both sides and the narrow spaces where luck lives. He thought of how quickly a legend can be overtaken by a schedule. Supremacy is not a shout. It is a checklist, repeated without fail. The Pacific still burned after June 19th. Campaigns remained brutal, costly, and long. Yet the air above those waters had changed owners. From that morning forward, the fleet did not wait to see who would arrive. It decided who would arrive, and when, and under what sky. And that, more than any headline, is the legacy of the day Japan lost the sky. Dramatization. Note Harrington, Ortiz, Green, and Dalton are composite characters used for narrative clarity. Dialogue is dramatized from period procedures and after-action themes. No verbatim quotations are asserted. Naval History and Heritage Command NHHC Battle of the Philippine Sea. H. Graham on Operation Forager, ETHW Radar, and the Fighter Directors CIC, Vectoring, USNI, Naval. Hisodebedor fein setter warfistery bendeish. Body Magazine, Proximity VT-fuzed, and Naval AA. NHHC aircraft data cards, F6F Hellcat, A6M 0 mid-war variants. Research starters, Naval War College review loss ranges and fighter direction.